when 56-year-old Lai Jun stepped off the dusty train platform in Cheyenne, Wyoming. She held little more than a worn carpetbag and a letter filled with promises. A marriage proposal from a widowed rancher had pulled her halfway across the world. But what greeted her wasn't warmth or welcome, it was a rejection so sharp it cut deeper than the harshest prairie wind. The man who'd summoned her, Wade Harlan, gave her a single glance before shaking his head, as if she were livestock that failed to meet his standards. "You're smaller than I expected," he said flatly, disappointment clinging to every syllable. "I specifically asked for a sturdy woman, someone who could handle ranch work, not break under pressure." Lai opened her mouth to speak, tried to tell him that strength didn't always come in brawn, that her hands, though delicate, had worked through 30 years of intricate seamstress labor, that her will had withstood storms no plainsman could fathom. But Wade had already turned away. His verdict was final. "I'll arrange your return passage," he said, his hat tipping in a formality that felt like mockery. "This won't do." And just like that, she was left alone on the cracked wooden planks of the platform, wind tugging at her skirts, her dreams collapsing like paper in the rain. It had taken her 3 weeks to reach Wyoming territory, weeks of hope, courage, and every coin she possessed. Now all she had was her carpetbag, its contents a sacred reminder of the life she'd left behind. Her mother's silver thimble, needles fine enough to pierce silk, spools of thread in a rainbow of colors, and a small pouch holding her grandmother's pearl buttons in London's East End. She'd been somebody. Lai Jun's alterations were the pride of tailors and brides alike, but when factories churned out cheap, ready-made garments, her skills became obsolete overnight. On the same day she received the eviction notice from her tiny flat, a letter arrived from the matrimonial agency, an answer to a prayer, or perhaps a cruel trick played by fate. Wade Harlan had been there at the station, just as promised, medium height, prematurely gray, hands like leather from long days of labor. But when he saw her step off the train, he'd examined her the way one might judge a mare, calculating, detached. "You're smaller than I expected," he'd repeated, his voice devoid of warmth. "I needed someone who could help with the cattle, not someone who'd get trampled by a bull." That was yesterday. She'd spent the night curled on a depot bench, her bag serving as a pillow, her dreams unraveling with every passing hour. Trains came and went, carrying strangers to destinations she'd never see. Cheyenne in 1885 was a place of dust and ambition. Wooden buildings clawed at the sky like weeds in the prairie, and the streets pulsed with cowboys, merchants, and drifters who all seemed to know where they were going. She felt like driftwood caught in their current unseen, unnecessary as the morning sun climbed high. She took refuge beneath the depot's overhang. From there, she could see the cattle pens, where dust rose like smoke and animals bawled in protest. Amidst the chaos, one man stood apart, tall, enormously tall. She thought perhaps 6'6", with a presence that quieted the noise around him. His hat, battered and sun-faded, shaded silver-gray hair, and his face lined with time and weather radiated something rare, gentleness. He moved through the cattle with a grace that defied his size. His voice, low and calming, soothed the animals as he guided them. He didn't just handle the beasts, he honored them, respected them. There was reverence in his touch. She watched him, unaware of how long, until he paused to wipe sweat from his brow. Their eyes met across the dusty yard, and neither of them looked away. He nodded, touching his hat brim in acknowledgement, then returned to his work. Her stomach growled in protest. She hadn't eaten since the day-old biscuits she'd packed from the last station. A nearby cafe beckoned, but her money had to last. Her dignity, however, was wearing thin. Have you ever been judged before your voice was even heard? Tell me in the comments, because what happened next changed everything. As the afternoon shadows stretched long, the tall cowboy finished tending the cattle, while the other men drifted toward the saloon. He turned and made his way to the depot toward her. "Ma'am," he greeted, touching his hat brim again. His voice was deep and rough, like riverbed gravel. "I couldn't help but notice you've been here since yesterday. Everything all right?" The kindness in his tone nearly undid her. She stiffened her spine. "I'm quite well, thank you," she said, chin lifted with dignity she didn't quite feel. "Just waiting for the eastbound train." He looked at her, really looked at her, with pale blue eyes that seemed to read every chapter of her story, begging, "Your pardon, Mum, but you seem like someone who's had a run of bad luck." He extended a calloused hand. "Name's Boone Ellis. Most folks just call me Boone." "Lai Jun," she answered. Then, with a bitter little laugh, "Formerly of London, England, and more recently, a mail-order bride who didn't meet expectations." Recognition flickered across his face. "Wade Harlan?" he asked. She blinked in surprise. "You know him?" "Saw you two talking yesterday," he said quietly. "Saw how it ended, too." His jaw clenched. "Wade's not a cruel man, but he's got a narrow view of what makes a good wife. Real narrow. And what do you think makes a good wife, Mr. Ellis?" His answer came without pause. "Character," he said. "Kindness. The strength to weather storms and not lose who you are in the middle of them. Size don't mean a damn thing compared to that." For a long moment, she said nothing. No one had spoken to her like that in years, maybe ever. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he saw her, not as a burden or a mistake, but as a person with value yet untouched. And in that quiet moment, beneath a western sky painted in dust and fading sun, something shifted. Not in the world, but in her. ***. Has anyone ever spoken to her with such kindness? She murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "That's generous of you," she replied softly. "But I'm afraid Mr. Harlan's opinion was the only one that mattered." Her voice carried quiet resignation. "I'll be returning to New York tomorrow." Returning to what, exactly? The question landed like a stone in still water, catching her off guard. "What do you have back there? Family, a job, somewhere that feels like home?" she faltered. The truth stood silently between them. She had none of those things. No family to embrace her, no career to occupy her days, no home that welcomed her back. All she had was a flickering hope that somewhere, somehow, life might grant her another beginning. "I have a proposition, Miss June," he said gently. "There's an old line shack about 3 miles north of here. Sits right on Antelope Creek. I built it myself years ago. It's small, just one room with a stone fireplace and a sturdy roof, but it's dry and solid. You're welcome to stay there while you decide your next move." I couldn't possibly accept such generosity from a stranger. "Why not?" His tone was calm, matter of fact. "You look like someone who could use a safe place to rest. And frankly, I'd rest easier knowing you weren't sleeping on benches at the depot." "But what would people say?" she asked, a note of concern creeping in. A woman alone, accepting shelter from a man she just met. His smile was tender, unbothered. "People will say what they want to say, Miss June. The real question is, what do you think? Do you believe I'd ever do you harm?" Her eyes searched his weathered face, looking for cracks, signs of hidden intent. But what she found instead was sincerity so raw, so honest that it took her breath away. There was no menace behind his gaze, only the quiet offering of safety, and for the first time in months, a chance to simply breathe. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I do trust you, Mr. Ellis." The old line shack rested by the creek like a forgotten hymn, its logs weathered to silver and its presence soft in the fading light. It was small, one room, a stone chimney, windows as small as afterthoughts. But after a cold night on a depot bench, it looked like a palace. "Built it in '78, Boone said as he pushed the door open. "Needed something for the line riders to keep an eye on the herd. Spent 3 weeks cutting every log myself, inside. Dust motes drifted lazily in shafts of golden sunlight. The room was sparse, rough wooden table, stone hearth, a simple bed frame, but it had a quiet dignity. "It's perfect," Lahi said, and meant it. Boone blinked, as if surprised by her words. "Hasn't been used in years. Could use a bit of cleaning, some fresh linens, a few supplies. I'll ride into town tomorrow, get you what you need." "Mr. Ellis, why are you doing this? Why help me? You don't know me. You owe me nothing." He took off his hat, running fingers through his silver hair. A flicker of something unspoken passed across his face. For a moment, she glimpsed at profound loneliness. "I know what it feels like," he said finally, "to be alone in the world. To wake up every day with no one who notices if you're breathing or not. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. You don't have any family?" "No, ma'am." Fever took my folks when I was 16. Been on my own ever since." He glanced around the cabin. "This place has sat empty too long. Seems only right someone should use it." As twilight deepened and firelight flickered across the walls, Lai felt something warm settle into her chest, a sense of belonging. The cabin wasn't hers, and probably never would be, but it offered something far more important than ownership: peace and safety. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Boone brought her supplies. She mended his shirts and swept the floors. They shared quiet meals and long conversations, as if they'd known each other far longer than a few days. But paradise rarely escapes the attention of wagging tongues. "Had a visitor today," Boone said one afternoon, his jaw tight with tension. "Who?" "Mrs. Birdie May from the Church Ladies' Auxiliary." Words gotten out. "Folks are talking." Lai felt her stomach twist. "And what exactly are they saying?" "Nothing." "Kind," he muttered. "Seems some think it's improper a single woman living out here alone, being helped by an unmarried man. They're worried about appearances." "And what do you think about appearances?" His pale eyes sparked with fire. "I think Birdie May and her friends would rather see you curled up on a cold bench than risk a bit of scandal. They'd choose gossip over grace every time, but their concerns aren't entirely wrong." Lai said softly, "I am an unmarried woman, taking refuge with a man I barely know. Proper society." Boone's voice rose. "Proper society would have left you to rot at that depot, would have watched you starve rather than raise an eyebrow." The sudden intensity in his tone surprised her. "You're angry." "Damn right I am." His voice trembled with conviction. "Those women talking about propriety, where were they when you had nothing? When you were sleeping under open skies? What good is their morality if it only shows up when it's easy?" 2 weeks later, while tidying papers Boone had left in the corner trunk, Lai found something that made her knees buckle. Tucked between old invoices and letters was a folded deed, not just to a small plot, but 2,000 acres of prime Wyoming land. The name on the document, Boone Ellis. She stared at it in disbelief. He wasn't just a ranch hand offering kindness to a stranger. He was a landowner, a wealthy, powerful man in his own right, possibly one of the most influential in the territory. And he'd never said a word. When he walked through the door that evening, she was waiting, the deed clutched in her trembling hands. "You lied to me," she said flatly. He stopped short, the blood draining from his face. "Lai, 2,000 acres. Boone, you're not some wandering cowboy with a generous heart. You're one of the territory's biggest landowners. Why didn't you tell me?" He sank into a chair, the weight of the truth aging him in an instant. "Because," he started, voice trailing off into the firelight, ***. I've come to learn that people often notice wealth before they ever notice the man behind it." He said quietly, "I wanted you to see me first, the real me, the real me." "The real you," her voice caught, rising with emotion. "Which one was real, Boone, the modest cowboy or the rich landowner?" "Both," he answered, his voice steady and soft. "The money came later through years of hard work, careful decisions, and luck I never counted on. But it didn't change who I was inside. I'm still the same man who lost his parents too young, who's walked through this life mostly alone, and who saw a woman in trouble and wanted to help. But you let me believe. I let you believe I was someone worth knowing for reasons that had nothing to do with what I own." He interrupted gently. "And wasn't I right? Don't tell me these weeks didn't matter to you." The silence between them thickened, charged with the weight of truth, because the truth was they had meant something more than she'd anticipated, more than she'd been prepared for. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered. "Then believe this," he said, leaning closer. "Every moment we shared, every talk we had, every meal, those were real. The only thing I kept from you was the size of my bank account." Before she could respond, the sound of hooves broke the moment. Judge Emery Jack, the territorial magistrate, stepped down from his horse with the gravity of a man used to delivering difficult news. "Miss June," he said with a respectful tip of his hat, "I've come regarding your situation. There's talk around town, and I'm afraid if it isn't addressed soon, there might be legal consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Boone asked, stepping closer. "Protective, vagrancy, moral impropriety." The ladies' auxiliary is especially vocal about seeing this matter handled in accordance with local expectations. Once the judge left, Lai wandered down to the creek, needing space to breathe. The water tumbled over smooth stones, unbothered by human complications. She stood still, wrapped in the hum of nature, questions swirling. Had she been living a lie, accepting help from a man who could afford to buy and sell half the territory? Was it charity or something deeper? She thought back to the little moments, the way he'd whittled a spoon with careful hands, how he'd noticed when her buttons were missing, the tenderness in his voice when he spoke of the parents he'd lost. Had any of that been false? When she finally returned, the sun had dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the porch where Boone stood waiting, something small wrapped in cloth in his hands. "Before you say anything," he began, "this isn't about buying forgiveness. I just need you to understand." He gently unwrapped the cloth, revealing a simple gold ring, worn smooth by time. "This was my mother's wedding band, the only thing of hers I held onto after she passed. I've carried it for 40 years, never imagining I'd offer it to anyone." He dropped to one knee, the ring gleaming softly in his weathered palm. "I'm not asking you to marry me because of gossip or the law. I'm asking because, somewhere in these past weeks, you became the home I never thought I'd find. The money, it's just money, but you're everything I didn't know I needed." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "How do I know what's real anymore? Let me show you," he whispered. He rose and reached for her hand. He led her up a winding path to a ridge overlooking the valley, now painted in gold and crimson by the setting sun. There, halfway constructed but already full of promise, stood the frame of a house. "I started building this the day after you agreed to stay," he said. "Not because I expected anything from you, but because I hoped you might find a reason to make this place your home." "You were building me a house," she murmured. "I was building us a future, if you'll have it." She looked at the structure, then the ring in his palm, and finally into his face lined with solitude, but now softened with hope. "This ring," she said quietly, "it doesn't come with conditions, only love," he said. "Only the promise that whatever I have is yours, not because you need it, but because you deserve it." The wedding was as simple as it was heartfelt. Beneath a pine bough arch, with Judge Jack officiating and a few kind townsfolk gathered to witness, they spoke their vows. Lahi wore the blue dress he'd bought her that first day, now tailored to perfection. Boone wore his best shirt, the one she'd mended with care long before they knew what lay ahead. They shared their first coffee as husband and wife from the same dented tin cup they'd used in the little shack they once called shelter. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as they sat side by side on the porch of their cabin, now truly theirs. "I've been ready my whole life," she replied softly. "I just didn't know it until now." ***. The town didn't quite know what to make of them at first. Some folks whispered behind cupped hands, their curiosity laced with judgment. But over time, the murmurs softened. People began to notice the way Boone looked at Lahi, not with possession, but with reverence. Even the most skeptical, like Bertie May, couldn't deny that something beautiful had taken root. They watched as Lahi unfolded before their eyes, no longer the timid woman from the train station, but someone self-assured, capable, radiant. She moved through the community with quiet grace, her independence undeniable, her presence magnetic. The couple built a life stitched together by small rituals, working side by side on the ranch, sharing midday coffee from the same tin cup, tending their growing garden and each other's dreams. Lahi's needlework, once just a way to pass lonely hours, became the talk of the territory. Her business flourished, but more importantly, so did she. What they built wasn't loud or grand, but it was steady, rooted in deep respect, honest labor, and the soft kind of love that holds fast through storms. Even the women at church eventually nodded her way with smiles instead of suspicion. Not that Lahi needed their acceptance anymore. She'd found something far more powerful than approval. She'd found herself. By the time spring rolled around, bursting onto the Wyoming plains in a flurry of green, their life was thriving. Roses climbed the cabin walls, and their days settled into a peaceful rhythm. Sitting together in the rocking chairs Boone had built by hand, they watched the sun drop behind the horizon like it was painting the land just for them. The tin cup rested on the table between them, worn now to a soft gleam from daily use. "Any regrets?" Boone asked gently, his hand wrapping around hers, calloused and familiar. "Only that it took me 56 years to find you," Lai whispered. That morning, a letter had come from London, a distant cousin curious about why she'd left city life behind. Her reply was simple: because in this wild, untamed land, she'd finally discovered the truest parts of herself, and in finding herself, she'd stumbled into a life she never knew she was missing. Once dismissed for being too small, too plain, too old, Lai Jun Ellis had become the soul of a sprawling ranch, the heart behind a successful business, and the beating center of a love story that softened even the hardest skeptics. Her worth wasn't measured in inches or voice volume, but in the gentle force of her resilience, her quiet persistence, her calm strength, her kindness in a world that often rewards cruelty. These were the things that transformed not just her life, but the community around her. As the coyotes called across the open prairie, Boone gave her hand a squeeze. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked, eyes glinting in the last light. "For seeing me before I saw myself, for taking a chance on a stranger, for believing in something neither of us had the words for back then." "Thank you," she replied, "for seeing past what I feared, made me invisible." Above them, the sky deepened into indigo, stars slipping quietly into view. And there on the porch, in the gentle hush of twilight, Lai Jun Ellis finally understood what it meant to belong to a place, to a person, and most importantly, to herself. She had thought her time had passed, that love and purpose belonged to the young, the bold, the unbroken. But Boone had looked at her and seen something she hadn't dared to imagine for herself: potential, beauty, value. In the years that followed, their story became legend around those parts, not because of wealth or drama, but because of the simple, lasting power of their bond. The old lion shack where their journey began still stands beside Antelope Creek, weathered but solid. People say it feels peaceful there, like the walls remember how to cradle hope and whisper encouragement to those who think they've run out of chances. Inside their main house, on a shelf where sunlight often lands in the morning, sits a hand-stitched wedding ring quilt, each piece sewn, mended, and reworked with care. It's not perfect, but that's the point. Every seam tells a story of second chances, of things broken and made beautiful again. And beside that quilt, their tin cup, ordinary, inexpensive, but priceless in what it represents. Daily shared moments, ordinary days that added up to an extraordinary life. Love doesn't always come in with fanfare. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing worn boots and offering a second chance. Sometimes it speaks softly, in the voice of someone who sees your value when you've forgotten it yourself. It offers steadiness when you're lost, faith when you're tired, and shelter when the rest of the world feels cold. Lai Jun's life reminds us that no matter our age or past disappointments, we are never beyond the reach of love, never too far gone for joy, never too late to begin again. What started as a painful rejection bloomed into a life rooted in mutual respect and quiet courage. The woman once dismissed as too small had become a force of nature, her heart the strongest part of her. Her journey tells us that even when the world breaks us down, we can still choose to rebuild with grace, that failure isn't an ending, but often the moment that redirects us to something far better, and that the most powerful stories don't end in heartbreak, they begin there. Their love still lives in the whispers of the Wyoming wind, in every stitch of that old quilt, in the smooth surface of that shared tin cup. It endures as a testament to what can bloom when two people choose to see the best in one another and hold on even when the world tells them to let go.